He won a higher share of women who identified as pro-choice in 2024 after Dobbs than he did in 2020 before Dobbs. Okay. More than a quarter. Just let that sink in for a minute.
That's enough to just make me want to hang up the podcast mic, to be honest. Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. It is Friday. I've got with me friend of the pod, Ron Brownstein, senior editor at The Atlantic, senior political analyst for CNN. His most recent book is Rock Me on the Water, 1974, the year Los Angeles transformed music, movies, television, and politics. I wish we could just talk about that, but I will talk about L.A. and the fires. And you're coming at us from Venice. We'll get to all that at the end. But first, how are you doing? How are things?
Yeah, we're okay. I mean, we were packed and ready to go, but the evacuations never got down as far south as us. They really kind of stopped in Santa Monica. But, Tim, I mean, like everybody else, we know people who have just been utterly devastated about this. I mean, when you think about it, there were the two largest fires. One was on the kind of the heart of the West Side, and one was on kind of the heart of the East Side. So it feels like everybody in LA knows people who have been displaced or face these unimaginable losses. And it's going to be a long road back for, not only the city as a whole, but for so many individuals. It's just a tough time.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. I keep hearing from friends and people out there, and it's just like who kind of go back to the neighborhoods to check on what's happening in the Palisades and Altadena. It's worse. Everybody's like, it's worse than you even think. Just total devastation. All right, I want to do the politics of that towards the end. But speaking of total devastation, I want to get I haven't had you on since the election. So I wanted to get your biggest picture view on kind of what we know now. There's, some more data has come out. There's all these snap vibes and narratives that get out there. And at the time, and you interviewed the Harris advisors about a month ago. We'll put that link in the show notes for people that want to read that. But I want to cut through, like, at the most top level. There's a fundamental question that is emerging on the Democratic side. Was this about depressed Democratic turnout, or was it about a shift towards Trump? And obviously it's always a little bit of both, but I'm wondering how you would adjudicate that conversation.
Yeah, I think that there was both, because they were both a dependent variable of the larger dynamic. And the larger dynamic was that a considerable majority of the country was dissatisfied with the results they got from the Biden presidency. And in the normal hydraulics of American politics, voted for the party that was not in the White House. I have said, and I believe, the most shocking thing about this election was how normal it was. I mean, you go through, given that Donald Trump is anything but a normal candidate, and yet voters more or less treated him as one. In that, through American history, as I said, when people are unhappy with the way things are going, they vote for the other party. And, we saw in both the exit polls and the AP Votecast, which are our two main sources so far, we'll get more later on what voters did and why, and they used to be Coke and Pepsi, like kind of this rivalry, but they ended up being very, very similar in this election in terms of what they came back with and what they found. I mean, almost identical. And they both found that roughly 60% of Americans disapproved of Joe Biden's job performance, and 80% plus of those disapprovers voted for Trump. They found that 70% of Americans described the economy as negative in negative terms, and 70% of those people voted for Trump. That was essentially what we have seen through American history. And, you may have seen, like, the one data point that really underscored this to me was in 2008, when Barack Obama won to succeed the unpopular outgoing president of the other party, right?
Yep.
62% of voters who said the country was on the wrong track voted for him. Okay. In 2024, when Donald Trump won to succeed the unpopular outgoing president of the other party, wait for it, 62% of voters who said the country was on the wrong track voted for him. For all the things that make Donald Trump a distinctive candidate, like, I mean, all of the personal baggage, all of the remarks that could alienate various groups, all of the extreme policy proposals, enough of the electorate treated him as if he was, Dwight Eisenhower after Harry Truman, or, I don't know, or Warren Harding after Woodrow Wilson. I mean, it was, maybe that's a better analogy.
Grover Cleveland after Benjamin Harrison.
Yes, exactly. So, or Grover Cleveland again after Benjamin Harrison, McKinley after Cleveland. Like, basically, there were other things going on. I mean, clearly the long-term shift among non-college, non-white men is something that Democrats have to worry about. But if you ask me what was the biggest thing that decided this election, it was that a considerable, a comfortable majority of Americans were dissatisfied with the Biden presidency and voted for the other party in a reflection of the historic hydraulics of American politics. And one last point that I think really underscores that, which is, as I have written, Trump won a substantial number of votes from people who still expressed significant doubts about him and his agenda, right? I mean, I had to go back to my stories to look, but basically somewhere between 1/6 and 1/5 of his voters would agree with sentiments like he was too extreme, or he would steer the country in an authoritarian direction, or he lacks the character to be president. He won a higher share of women who identified as pro-choice in 2024 after Dobbs than he did in 2020 before Dobbs. Okay. More than a quarter. Just let that sink in for a minute.
That's enough to just
right.
Let that hang up the podcast mic, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, a quarter of Latinos, more than a quarter of Latinos who said they oppose mass deportation, voted for him. And what all of these different data points tell me is that the dissatisfaction, primarily over inflation, to some extent on the border, just simply outweighed at this moment voters' hesitations and concerns about Trump. I wrote I've been thinking about this. Like, when you go through all of the results, the county results, the state results, all of these exit poll and votecast results, it's almost like you're sitting in an archaeological dig and you are picking up little pieces of broken pottery and you're dusting them off and trying to see how they fit together. I mean, that's what it feels like to me after elections. And this is my 11th presidential election. But to me, like, there was one data point that was like the master shard. It was like the Rosetta Stone. And I'll tell you what it was. I got the exit poll people to run this for me. 36% of all voters, so we're talking about a lot of people, a big chunk of voters, 36% of all voters said they were pro-choice, but viewed the economy as only fair or poor. Okay, so to me, that was kind of the battle of the bulge. I mean, that was Harris's best argument. Trump is a threat to your rights, particularly on reproductive rights, and Trump's best argument, which is that the Biden administration has mismanaged the economy. And in that collision of strength against Trump, Trump basically broke even. In the exit poll, he won 50% he won among voters who were both pro-choice and negative on the economy. In the exit poll, he beat Harris by 3. In the AP Votecast, she beat him by 2. But either way, it meant that vastly more voters who were pro-choice voted for him than voted for Republican candidates in 2022 because they prioritized the economy more. And that just could not be overcome, particularly in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. I'm sorry, I'm filibustering you here, but really, this kind of really underscores it. Among white women without a college degree, right? They are just crucial to how those states turn out, right? Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They're always crucial to how those states turn out. Among white women without a college degree who supported legal abortion, but described the economy in negative terms, you know how they broke? 2-1 for Trump. And that basically tipped those states, even though Democrats had $120 million.
Wait, hold on. I just want to put a fine point on that. Yeah. So was that non-college white women or all non-college?
No, non-college white women. Non-college white women who supported legal abortion but were negative on the economy, they voted 2-1 for Trump. Even the college white women who supported legal abortion and were negative on the economy only narrowly voted for Harris. And all of this explains what I kind of view as a critical variable, which is that if you look at 2022 and you look at candidates like Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, Tony Evers, Raphael Warnock, Katie Hobbs, Mark Kelly, they all won a significantly higher share of voters who were pro-choice in their state than Harris did 2 years later. I mean, Harris just, the abortion issue did not move as many people as it did 2 years earlier because too many of them were unhappy with the economy and were not willing to look past it in the presidential race in the way they were in a governor or Senate race. And to me, we can talk about the structural change, and you can't deny there's some of that happening with non-white men in particular. But the core thing that happened was that economic discontent overwhelmed both the Democrats' best issues and overwhelmed the doubts about Trump, which are still there.
So it's not Rovember. That's what you're telling me. It turned out not to be Rovember.
It turned out not. It turned out not. It turned out that I don't know what was the period of the highest inflation, the summer of 21 till the fall of 22. It turned out that was the decisive period of this election, and that 2022, as I wrote, kind of gave Democrats a misleading signal because as you wrote, I wrote, everybody wrote. It was Democrats in 22 won an unprecedentedly high share of voters who were discontented with Biden and discontented with the economy. And
the double haters, we talked about this.
The double haters,
the Dems did great with the double haters in the midterms.
Yeah, not this time.
You wrote about that. If people want to read more about that, it's called Democrats' Error Message, looking at kind of what was missed from 2022. I want to dig into that a little deeper because I think there's possibly a different interpretation. I hear what you're saying about how the economy overwhelmed concerns about Trump and Roe, but is that true? I don't know. It doesn't seem like the same voters in 2022 tacked back.
Yeah,
right.
No, that's right.
It was a different electorate, right? And maybe the types of people that are showing up in a presidential election is it a different? Is a group that's meaningfully different in the types of information they have about the candidates? They have less information. Are they more inclined to be moved by cultural kind of issues and cultural mores and worries that the Democrats moved to the left on cultural issues? Right. I mean, because to your point, the economy got better between 22 and 24, not worse, right? And so maybe it's more about the makeup of the electorate. I don't know, but you kind of analyze this more. What did you think about that?
No, that's definitely part of the story. I mean, I think one big part of the story is that voters view the president as the repository of economic policy, and we're not as willing to look past their economic discontent in picking a president as they were a governor or senator. So I think that's part of it. But I agree.
That's moronic, but okay. Yeah,
yes,
okay, that's true. That's a good. Right, that's probably right. That's right. Correct as an analysis of what voters think. But FYI, if you have that voter in your life, the governor actually is pretty important to your economic well-being
and your day-to-day life. Look, I mean, all before we get to your second point, and maybe this does get to your second point. I mean, all year, right? Democratic pollsters and people working in kind of progressive groups would say that every time they did a focus group with Black, Latino, or even in some cases Asian American men, they would say you could not get through an hour and a half without hearing what one described to me as the nightmare phrase. And the nightmare phrase in this focus group was, yeah, he's a pig, he's a racist, he's a misogynist, he says and does things that I don't respect. But if I'm being honest, I had more money in my pocket at the end of the week when he was president, right? And so, that is the universe of voters who, as you say, were more likely to participate in many ways, white ones and non-white ones, in the presidential election than in the midterm. And there is definitely a problem Democrats face in that many of these surge voters are now, as you point out, not listening to us today, not tuning in even to Fox or Newsmax. I mean, there are people who are largely avoiding political content and political news. But as I say, they are expert in their own lives. And these are to say that like these were voters who drifted toward Trump because they didn't know all the wonderful things Biden has done, which I think I've heard at times, not from you, but from some Democrats. That's not right. I mean, what I think what was clear, not only for these surge voters, but for a lot of traditional voters, more regular voters, is that Biden's failures eclipsed his successes for them. And the way they interpreted the Biden economy was inflation.
With Lawrence O'Donnell. Biden was like, not exactly, but he was like, maybe I should have put my name on the stimulus checks and that people should have learned more about the infrastructure. And it's kind of like, no, I don't, that's not it. It wasn't
it's not that, it's like, I the other day, like, they put out a figure toward the end of his, look, Biden had real successes economically that were precisely targeted toward the groups that really delivered the election to Trump. He, as I've written, going all the way back to 2021, he had a very different theory of the case than Obama or Clinton. Obama or Clinton both were more in the camp of what you earn depends on what you learn, and figuring out how to get more people, advanced education that would theoretically equip them for better paying jobs that would open up as we expand trade and lower barriers around the world, even if that costs some, as it turned out, many blue collar jobs in the US. Biden was very different from day one in that he basically emphasized from the beginning that he wanted to create work that could support a middle class life for people without a college degree. Tim, every time he went to one of those plant openings, the Intel plant in Ohio or the other semiconductor plant in Arizona or one of the EV plants, he talked about how many blue collar jobs he was creating. And in fact, according to the White House, they created 1.6 million jobs in manufacturing and construction. That is a serious record, over $1 trillion in private investment linked to, his big economic bills. And yet, 1.6 million jobs. Okay, how many non-college workers and voters were there? Maybe 90 million, right? So for the vast majority of them, what was their interpretation? What was their experience of the economy? It wasn't the stock market going up, because most of them don't have stock. They were probably employed when Biden got into office. They may have benefited from bidding on blue collar, labor that bid up their wages. But what was their main experience? It was that gas and groceries cost too much. So like focusing on the idea that these were low information voters, definitely true. But to me, kind of obscures the larger point. As I say, they are expert in their own lives, and they were not feeling that they got what they expected or desired out of the Biden presidency. They had this point of reference, this idea that it was easier under Trump. They had more money in their pocket under Trump. And even though his agenda, by most serious analysis, had more inflationary risk than Harris, it's kind of hard to convince people that it's going to be worse under the guy that they remember it being better under.
I think that you're absolutely right, and I don't want this follow-up question to make it seem like I'm minimizing the fact that people were, particularly working class folks, were voting in part on the fact that they're experiencing pain from inflation and that their wages weren't meeting it. That said, it's important to kind of hash out, right, like how much of this is economy and how much of this is cultural, right? Because it matters to what the Democrats do going forward. And I just want to use one example because it was such a hot spot in the election. I pulled this up for you on. Looked at Clark County, Ohio, which is where Springfield is, right? In 16, so the whole controversy about the Haitians was premised on the fact that there were more jobs coming into Clark County, into Springfield, and that they couldn't fill them, right? So they had to bring in Haitians. So like there was, and that Springfield was on a comeback. So there's economic growth happening in Springfield. If you ask Mike DeWine or the new senator he just appointed, John Husted, they would talk about the economic growth in Clark County that happened. In 16, Trump 57, Clinton 38. In 24, Trump 64, Harris 34. So he gained a net 11 points in a county that was having economic growth over that period on the back of Biden policies. And yet still people are like, nope, F it. And so to me, that says that it's obviously all these things are a mix, but there's a big part of this that is some just cultural disconnect.
Look, the core of the Trump coalition, the core of the Trump coalition are voters who are hostile to the way America is changing on every front, culturally, demographically, and economically. If you go back to 2016, the very clear research off the the CES, the cooperative survey, was that the best predictor of support for Trump was not economic distress. It was the belief that whites face more discrimination at this point than non-whites, and that women are really seeking special favors when they ask for equal treatment. And that cultural resentment is at the heart of the Trump coalition. I mean, without doubt, and still is. The last piece that gets him over the top is in this election were voters who may actually be even inclined toward those positions or not, but are not really moved by them. I think they are voters who are moved more by performance, by Biden's performance, and believing that Trump gave them a better chance to kind of get what they wanted out of their own lives. I agree with you that I think it is inevitable that the next Democratic nominee, a la Clinton after Dukakis in '92, a transition that I covered really intensively, is going to be more centrist on all of these cultural hot point issues. I think I do. Yes.
It's inevitable, you think?
I think it's going to be, I think it is highly likely. I have a hard time after this result seeing the Democrats just kind of ignoring any of the signals they were getting on crime or immigration. But, there's a way.
I'm worried that it is the Luigi Mangione pivot. And that the Democrats say, what we really need to do is be meaner towards CEOs, and we can still not change anything culturally. I don't think that's a totally irrational thing for them to think. I think it's wrong. But I think that might happen.
Here's the thing. Here's what I think where there is a broad the problem with that line of argument, even in the Democratic Party, is that even if you believe that voters were not making decisions based on these cultural issues, the cultural issues still had an economic impact, because at the least, it is, I think, indisputable, and I think widely accepted across the Democratic Party, that the way Trump used cultural issues sent the message to just kind of a wide swath of voters living paycheck to paycheck that Harris and Democrats care more about various kind of small groups with specific problems than they do about you. She's for they, them, right? So sure. Like whether or not you think there are, I think I have this right. In the vote cast, most voters opposed banning gender affirming care for minors. Okay. Most of them opposed it, but a lot of them,
really?
Yes.
That was the AP Vocast?
Yes. But a lot of them who supported it, a lot of them who opposed the ban voted for Trump anyway, in the same pattern that I'm talking about. And where this hurt Harris, I think, unquestionably, like where there's no doubt this hurt Harris, is the sense that her priorities were askew. That that Democrats were not really worried. They were more worried about undocumented immigrants in New York and, criminals' rights and, transgender teens than they were about me putting food on the table. And, I just think it is, I suppose there will be a fight about this, but I suspect the nominee in 28, the governors will have a leg up. And I think any governor who might be nominated will pursue a more centrist overall cultural message. And I do think that, look, the kind of consulting class doesn't always get its way, but and maybe, and they shouldn't. But if the consulting class did get its way, there is as close to 100% unanimity as I think you can find that Democrats have to avoid taking the bait on all of the cultural fights Trump provokes, and really try to center their messaging over the next 2 years on the core argument that he promised to solve your problems, but all he's really doing is enriching further his rich buddies. Like, that's what they want the next 2 years to be about. Trump will certainly give them a lot of ammunition to make that argument. But, again, like not getting drawn into these culture battles. And look, some of them may be unavoidable. I mean, if he takes mass deportation to the level that he's talking about, it's kind of unavoidable to display some resistance to that. But I do think coming out of this election, even amid disagreement about how much the cultural issues, how much voters voted on those issues, I think there is a basically party-wide consensus that it projected the message that we're more worried about these somewhat, fringe or esoteric concerns than we are about the broad mass of people.
Yeah. I love to zag from the consultant class. It makes me feel good because I think that is correct. I agree that frame is correct as the big frame, but I think they have to. They have to pick strategic battles to fight him on the culture front. I think is one where and probably where I really disagree is that the battles they would pick would be the wrong ones. So maybe it's better. So maybe it's better that they don't do any at all. But anyway, for another day. I just before we get to Biden and the fires, one more. I want to drill down one more time on the original question, right? Because there are a couple of stats that I have seen over the last week. One of them came from you that I want to talk about, which was one was about this question of turnout versus people shifting. One of them was about 90% of the counties in the country moved towards Trump, right?
Staggering, right?
Which is unbelievable. Which to me again shows that this is movement towards Trump. Then if you drill down on particularly these counties and precincts where you have high degrees of non-white working class voters, the numbers are unbelievable. Like particularly outside of the swing states, but even in the swing states like the Bronx, etc.
Yeah.
Though the other side of the argument, though the turnout side of the argument, this one really got my goat. Your fellow Venice resident Peter Hamby shared this one yesterday. The young people least likely to vote in 2024 because they didn't like either of the candidates were college educated Zoomers.
Interesting.
So there certainly was a drop among young voters who didn't feel motivated. Anyway, how do you adjudicate all that?
So I'm trying to remember whether it was the exit poll or the vodecast, but when I think it was both among people who voted in 2020, they were like 40. It was basically even Trump and Biden. Like the returning voters from 2020 split evenly between Biden and Trump in 2020, which means that there were a lot of by definition, there were a lot of Biden voters who didn't show up. Right. Because Biden won by 7 million votes. So the fact that the returning electorate was basically 50-50.
Well, not necessarily. I guess some of those couldn't.
No, it has to
maybe
be.
My math is bad here. Couldn't some of that be based on people just switching? Biden people switching?
No.
Or the actual turnout number was
this is when I'm trying to remember, it was the exit or the vodecast or maybe both of them. You ask people whether they voted in 2020 and who they voted for in 2020.
Yeah.
Okay. So these are actual 2020 voters.
Oh, got it. I understand.
So there should be like a 4-point Biden advantage, and there wasn't.
Right.
Okay. So that pretty clearly, I think, will say, when we get to Catalyst, will be the best. The Catalyst analysis will be the best analysis of the drop off, and I think that's real. But Trump won new voters, people who had not voted in 2020. Right. And so you can't ignore that. I mean, that's real too. I mean, as is usual, I don't think Trump vastly expanded his support. I mean, he did get more votes than he did.
And he certainly did in blue states. He certainly expanded his support in New York and New Jersey.
His total vote in, his overall national total vote was what was 79 million versus he got 78. He got more votes than he did last time, but there was also a significant element of Biden voters who didn't come back. And I guess I have not gotten this engaged in this debate because I feel like that both things are like two sides of the same coin. It's like the people who were disappointed in the outcomes of the Biden administration. Some of them were people who voted for him in 2020 and didn't come back, and some of them were new people who came out and voted for Trump. But it's still like either side of the ledger is still being driven. It's not like they're still being driven by largely the same force, which is, people didn't like what they got out of the last 4 years. And they thought Trump would do better on the things they cared most about, which overshadowed the continuing hesitations many of them still had about him. I mean, just kind of let it sink in that Trump won a higher share of women who identified as pro-choice in 24 than he did in 2020. Okay. And it wasn't like abortion was less relevant in 24 than it was in 20. I mean, it was, he had some success.
You also can't blame that on the campaign strategy,
No,
right? It's not like Kamala Harris didn't ensure that was a high salience issue for voters. Like people knew.
People knew, exactly. And it was just that for enough voters, their immediate circumstance just, was more important. And especially, that American Bridge spent $150 million on a program aimed solely at non-college white women in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And Harris did no better than Biden, maybe a little worse among them, after all of that effort, because no matter what messages you were driving, these were people who felt that their life just didn't work at the moment.
Yeah.
And, again, I'm not minimizing that cultural issues were a problem on some fronts for Democrats, although I am in the camp that think the problem was more one of voters making judgments about your priorities rather than making decisions on those issues themselves. But either way, it kind of suggests that, it has created a consensus, I think, among people who do politics for a living for Democrats, that Democrats have to figure out a way to focus on the economic struggles of middle class and working class families, avoid the bait of getting drawn into endless culture wars with Trump, and hammer away the message that he's really about enriching his rich buddies, not helping you. Don't forget, it is worth, in terms of thinking about how that may play out, Trump's lowest approval rating in his first term, besides January 6th, was very clearly around the effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. That was his lowest point as president. So, I think that's where Jeffries wants to go. I think that's where Schumer wants to go. But as you say, the discipline to avoid having the next 2 years defined by a series of culture war battles would be something of a break in behavior for Democrats.
Yeah, for everybody. Just to close the loop, it was Trump got 74.2 million votes in 2020, 77.3 in 2024. So 3 million more, second most of all time. So, there's something to think about that. After January 6th, second most
after January 6th. Yep.
Oh, blah.
At Catholic Charities agencies nationwide, "We are there" is more than a phrase. It's a promise. When storms hit, Catholic Charities is there to help families and communities recover and rebuild. As neighbors age, they lighten their burdens through senior programs and residences that offer a sense of home and all its comforts. As veterans adjust, Catholic Charities eases their transitions with housing, behavioral health services, and job training to help them adjust. Catholic Charities is there, serving millions each year, regardless of their faith. Local agencies know that every community is different and has different needs. They put food back on tables at pantries where clients can shop with dignity. They train and place local workers through career development programs that strengthen communities. They unlock doors to new homes and fresh hope. And they walk together with clients on the road back to a better life. Help Catholic Charities serve your neighbors in need and make communities stronger. Join them at wearethere.us. wearethere.us. That website again is wearethere.us.
Hey, y'all, if you love this podcast and want to listen to all Bulwark podcasts ad-free, join Bulwark Plus today. You can click the link in this description. You'll get the best politics newsletters in the business, and you can become a Bulwark Plus member right now. We'd appreciate it. Okay, I want to talk about the Biden farewell. Just while we're here, we have some little breaking news. Due to the dangerously cold temperatures expected Monday, Trump's inauguration is moving indoors.
Hey, you know what? I was in the pool for Reagan's inauguration in 1985 that had to be moved indoors. They did it. They did it.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was like, super, super cold. I was working then at National Journal, and somehow, it was our turn in the White House pool. And being very junior, I think I was the only person in the office, and the phone rings and it's the White House. And it's like, you guys are the pool. We're moving the inaugural inside. You want to go? yeah, I'll go to the inaugural. And I remember sitting on like it was so cramped that I was sitting on how you sit on the edge.
Where
of the press.
was it? Inside where? Where
it was inside the Capitol. I think it was in the rotunda, and there was a press riser with all these cameras packed in, which would normally be spread out on the mall. And I was sitting next to a senator, because there was no place for anybody, So there you go. Trump, will not be the biggest crowd ever, I guess. No. But yeah. So
Sean Spicer off the hook this time.
Sean Spicer off the hook.
All right, just really quick. I can only take so much Biden legacy stuff these days, but you do have an article in the Atlantic on why late regime presidencies fail. I'd love for you just to give us the thumbnail of it, and then people can go read the rest if they're intrigued.
So there's a great political scientist at Yale named Stephen Skowronek, who wrote a book in 1993, he's updated a few times, that argues that presidents fail or succeed based not only on their innate talents, but where they fall in the cycle of competition between the parties. Okay. There's kind of a waxing and waning of the strength of the parties through American history. Great realigning elections of 1828, 1860, 1896, 1932, arguably 1968, to some extent 1992, where the balance of power in the electorate shifts toward one side. And Skowronek basically argues that the presidents that we consider the weakest through American history are those who come in at the tail end, kind of the ass end of one of these coalitions, a coalition that has seen better days, but is able to squeeze out one more victory. So that would be John Adams in 1800, John Quincy Adams, his son, in 1824, Franklin Pierce and James Buchanan for the Democrats in the 1850s, Hoover in 1928, Carter in 1976. Arguably, I think, Skowronek does as well, Biden bears a lot of similarity to this. Biden was elected after a string where Democrats had won.
What, HW 92? Wouldn't HW 92 count?
HW would kind of count too. Yeah, I mean, HW would kind of count too. There was a shift in the electorate in 92. Democrats won the White House in 4 of the next 6 elections, won the popular vote in 5 of those next 6 elections. Trump wins in 2016, showing clear evidence of kind of, fracturing the Democratic coalition. And then Biden comes in 2020 and looks like he's put all the pieces back together, right? And you have that kind of Clinton era coalition of strong support among minorities, growing support among college educated whites, and just enough support among non-college whites, particularly in the Rust Belt. And in many ways, this is reminiscent of Carter, right? Because you have Nixon's victories in 68 and 72 show real fissures in the Democratic coalition that had dominated the previous decades. And Carter seems to pull it all back together, with just enough support among working class whites in the North and especially white evangelicals in the South. But in office, Carter and then Biden can't hold this coalition together either legislatively or in popular support. And and after their 4 years, they get routed. So I think the concern, the Skowronek argument is that the presidents we consider the most successful and consequential in American history are what he calls repudiating presidents, who come in immediately at this hinge point after the last president of the previous cycle failed.
This article's getting darker by the minute.
Yes, right. So they come in at the moment when the previous regime has been the most discredited, so they have the most leeway to change direction. So he cites Thomas Jefferson in 1800 after Adams, Andrew Jackson in 1828 after Adams Jr., Lincoln in 1860 after Buchanan, Roosevelt in 32 after Hoover, Reagan after Carter. He doesn't really consider the modern ones.
Maybe the stupidest president in history will break the trend. They're unable to capitalize on the trend.
That's what I mean. By the way, that's what Skowronek. I mean, I think there's a lot of reason to view Biden's experience as analogous to Carter's. However, there's a lot of reason to question whether Trump can seize the advantage created by that to the extent Reagan did. I mean, there's just no evidence in Trump's history, and certainly even in this transition, that he is capable of speaking to a broad enough audience or has the instincts to do that, to take advantage of the opening that Biden has left him. But I would say, Tim, that I am sympathetic to the point of view that the opening that is there is similar to what was there after Carter, where as you saw in that article.
I see it too.
Yeah. I mean, Skowronek says, the repudiating presidents get so much power because they basically are able to point to their predecessor as the embodiment of a failed regime. And he wrote this in 1993, they hearken back to the past, often a mythic past, to say that America has to recapture those values in order to get itself going again. And, Trump fits exactly the Trump-Biden kind of sequence, has a lot of similarity. Now, of course, the big difference is that objectively, the country is not nearly in as bad shape now as it was when Carter left office. So for Trump to argue that Biden has left him this big steaming pile of crap is a lot less credible than it was for Reagan. But when you're talking about a guy in Biden whose approval rating fell under 50% in summer of 2021, never got back over 50%, leaving with his lowest ratings ever, you've got to say, I think in Skowronek-ish terms, and it's a great book, people should read it. It's called The Politics Presidents Make. That Biden has left Trump a lot of room to consolidate a bigger coalition than he's ever had. The difference is, I don't think Trump's political instincts and his agenda are as congenial to doing that as Reagan's was.
Yeah, you make good pod. You know how to transition for me. Now, I think that if they were able to kind of take the good traits of Trump and J.D. Vance and mesh them together into a single president, the opportunity would be there. Like Trump's ability to appeal to kind of the less engaged voter, particularly these younger kind of men of color, that I think like him for various cultural reasons, as much as anything. Like if you're able to have that, but not have all the chaos and the nonsense and the sort of moronic instincts that Trump has at times, maybe it'd be a better position to take advantage of it. We'll see, as Trump likes to say. We'll see what happens.
Right.
I want to do fires really quick. My buddy Brian Tyler Cohen interviewed your governor Gavin Newsom, and they talked about the threat to withhold funding. Emergency funding from California, which I think is a real threat. Kristi Noem's testifying in front of Congress for a confirmation hearing right now, and she would not guarantee that they would give emergency funding. So I think it's a real threat. Here's what Gavin had to say about it.
Never in California questioned whether or not we as taxpayers in the largest state in the union should support the people of Louisiana at a time of emergency and need. We never conditioned it. We never talked about putting the full fate and credit of the United States of America with the debt ceiling bill so we can get tax cuts for billionaires and corporations that don't need it, and then put at risk the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans that happen to live in California, a state with millions and millions of Trump supporters, Speaker Johnson and Mr. President-elect. Millions of your supporters are out here. They need your help. They need your empathy. They need your care.
Empathy. Mike Johnson replied, Speaker Johnson, instead of making highly produced clapback videos with social media influencers, ouch, Brian, you should get to working helping Californians. What do you think about the politics of this for Gavin? Obviously it's cutting both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think the politics for Bass, the mayor, is pretty unequivocally bad. I think Newsom has looked better and, has been more dynamic in responding to this. One of the things I said about Trump I said always repeatedly was that Trump governed as a wartime president with blue America rather than any foreign nation as the adversary. And we were just talking about whether Trump has the vision and the emotional bandwidth to take advantage of the opportunity that Biden has left him, where you have voters way outside the traditional Democratic coalition who feel that, Democratic governance did not give them what they want. He can speak
way outside the traditional Republican coalition.
Way outside the traditional Republican coalition. Sorry. But what do you see from his instincts? The water argument that, somehow the North-South issues and the smell. I mean, there's nothing. that is not a serious argument. I mean, there's no urban water system in the country or fire department in the country that has a record of success trying to fight a fire of this magnitude. And as I've read, and you probably interviewed people, I mean, basically every time we've had a fire of this magnitude in an urban setting, the water has, largely run out. The question of forest management, Trump kind of had a point. He did have a point. Yeah. The state is investing a lot. The Biden administration and the infrastructure bill invested a lot, but he and Johnson and Republicans, really want to talk about anything but climate change, given that, where we're headed on that. Doug Burgum's confirmation hearings this week, where he said any attempt to reduce reliance on fossil fuels is misguided because it just means people are going to be buying it from Russia or Venezuela. I mean, like, LA is burning, dude. I mean, like, you're just ignoring what is happening, and Asheville did get flooded. Okay. Like, these things did happen, much as they are inconvenient for you. But I think, withholding aid from blue states, as he was, threatening to do during COVID, is a limiting, I think for his voters, it's fine. I mean, they want him to be at war against Blue America because, as we said, the core of his coalition is alienated from all the ways America is changing, and that is embodied in the blue states. And I think for a lot of his kind of casual voters, they're more focused on their own economic situation than what happens. But by and large, treating Blue America as an adversarial force to be occupied is going to do more in the end to limit than expand his reach. And I think, again, example A of why, even if Biden is creating the same opportunity for Trump that Carter created for Reagan, Trump is less likely to be able to seize it.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the Burgum thing, because you'd sent a tweet about this too, that Burgum is signaling that the administration is all in to stop or reverse the green energy transition. Like, that it's not just about investing in drilling, drill baby drill.
Totally.
It's also about stopping the green transition, which should be an interesting piece of information to the college-educated youth that decided they couldn't decide between the two candidates in this election.
Look, 80% of the investment tied to the Inflation Reduction Act, tied to all the big three bills, Inflation Reduction Act, infrastructure bill, 80% of that total investment has gone into Republican-held congressional districts. And they seem very determined to make it go away. I mean, there was no question this administration was going to try to do whatever it could to support fossil fuel industries. The question was whether they're also going to try to kneecap the alternatives. And I think they will probably do both. It's starting to look. Although, like I said, that 80% investment in Republican-held districts might be a circuit breaker on how far they can get with that.
As you mentioned at the top, we have a lot of friends that are suffering in LA, but you've also written a book about a year in LA. Do you have an ode? Do you want to leave us with an ode to Los Angeles? Any stories or anecdotes?
I said in the book, so my book is about LA in the early 1970s and the great pop culture produced then, movies like Chinatown, Godfather, Godfather 2, Shampoo, Nashville, Carnal Knowledge, the really, path-breaking TV, All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore, MASH, and then the great music, the Eagles, Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell. And basically the story is about how the pop culture produced in LA in the early 70s took the social critiques that emerged in the 60s, the critiques of American life, and mainstreamed them, brought them into the living room of the country, literally, in the case of All in the Family and Mary Tyler Moore, MASH. And I came away feeling, writing that book, I've always felt LA is kind of the capital of the future in American life, for better or worse. That, a lot of the things that the country will be dealing with, cultural changes, demographic changes, economic changes, happen here first. And sadly, this is another example of that. Coastal states in the Southeast with hurricanes, Southwest states with wildfires are most at risk. But man, Asheville was neither, and it was flooded. And, the amount of damage from hail and severe thunderstorms and flooding. And LA is living through this horrific tragedy, but more places are going to, unless we get control to any extent. Control is even the wrong word, unless we mitigate or slow the deterioration of the climate. And my heart goes out to So many people in LA. I mean, one big fire on the west side, one really big fire on the east side. There's virtually no one in the city who doesn't know someone who has been affected like this. And I hate to say this is coming to a neighborhood near you, but some version of this is this is 2025. What's 2035 going to look like if we allow the trajectory of extreme weather to go on uninterrupted in a Doug Burgum-like way that says anything we do just makes Russia stronger?
Ron Brownstein, thank you for your wisdom. And for all that, we'll put the links to your work in The Atlantic and to the book in the show notes, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Everybody else will be back here Monday. What are we going to talk about? I don't know. I think Tacitus or something. I'm going to quiz Bill Kristol on the Romans. I'm not sure if there's anything else going on Monday. We'll see you all back here then. Peace.